What I loved about my conversation with Lauren is that it really leaves you with a sense of confidence in how we're all going about building our world of sales. And every interaction we have with people gives us data points. And the more data points that we have to reference, the greater conversations, transactions, and opportunities are going to be afforded to us. This is especially important when we're communicating across multiple generations and diverse backgrounds. You're listening to Prospecting on Purpose, where we discuss all things prospecting, sales, business, and mindset. I'm your host, Sara Murray, a sales champion who's here to show you that you can be a shark in business and still lead with intentionality and authenticity. Tune in each week as we dive into methods to connect with clients, communicate with confidence, and close the deal. Hello, and welcome to Prospecting on Purpose. At the time of this recording, 2023 is coming to a close, and truly my favorite part about this entire year and one of my highest privileges has been the caliber of guests that we have had on this show. I loved every conversation. I've learned so much, and I've applied a lot of those lessons to my life and my business since meeting and interviewing these individuals. So it's been so wonderful that for this episode, I've compiled a guest roundup of the 15 guests that we've had on the show this year and my personal 1, 2, 3 takeaways from each. I know that the guest interviews are a little bit longer episodes. They range from about 35 minutes to 45 minutes, but they're all so fascinating. So if you get a chance and something resonates with you here in this roundup, go back and listen to their full episode and their full interview because there's just so much goodness and knowledge in each one. So jumping right in, I'm going to start with our first guest, episode 3, The Power of Reinvention with Kathy Sharp Ross. Kathy is the owner of the global brand and marketing agency, The Sharp Alliance. She has spent 30 years cultivating brands, businesses, deals, partnerships, and personalities in all industries. Kathy is also the author of the book, Reinvent Your Life, What Are You Waiting For? And host of the Power of Reinvention podcast. Kathy's episode is just full of really great strategies for managing stress, staying positive, how to maximize your time, how to prioritize your day. And then as the reinvention expert, we really dived into what is reinvention and how to create your own. And when we think about reinvention specifically to reinventing ourselves, these can be things that are big or small, and they can happen at any time. We get stuck in these routines or career trajectories or habits we don't like, and we either assume we can't break out of them or we forget that we can even try. So when you listen to Kathy, you really realize that nothing is limited to you. We are entitled to live the lives that we want to live. So a really big takeaway from Kathy for me personally was, what are we waiting for? Let's just go for it. And as a personal example happening right now, I have like 3 different ideas for Christmas movies. And I saw an ad for a virtual writing summit about how to write a Christmas movie. And so I'm taking the course and I have fun ideas, and maybe I'll write the movie, maybe I won't. But one of the biggest shifts that I feel is that I don't feel limited in exploring that option. Why couldn't I write a Christmas movie? I'm entitled to do whatever I want, and I want to try that. So Kathy's episode gives us permission to just try stuff and live a full, rich life, finding things that light us up. So it is such a great episode. I get a lot of great feedback on that from listeners. That is episode 3, The Power of Reinvention with Kathy Sharp Ross. Our next guest was Joe Welch, found in episode 5, Entrepreneurship in the World's Oldest Industry. Joe is the CEO and co-founder of In Good Taste, a wine company that creates ready-to-drink wine flights. And some of the more interesting things that I really took away from our conversation was that prior to founding In Good Taste, Joe had different roles at Twitter, DoorDash, and SpaceX. And we go into each one of those in the episode, but in each role, he learned the different skill sets that he needed to become an effective CEO. So I really loved the idea of taking those different skill sets and building upon one another. And he was really intentional about what he was learning at those companies. And I don't necessarily think you need to switch companies to learn new skills. Oftentimes there's different departments, different roles, different teams we can do in our organizations that we're in. And all of those skills really build upon each other. And I thought it was so cool to see how Joe leveraged all that to turn his passion and his hobby into his career. It was very cool. Another great takeaway that Joe left us with, and it has personally helped me in my business, is that when you're ready to start delegating, take a few hours, take a day, and really look at and identify your ankle biters. So ankle biters are the things that are preventing you from doing your role successfully. And once you identify them, how can you get them off of your plate? Can you outsource? Can you automate? Can you use AI? Can you streamline your operations? Can you ask for help? Eliminating your ankle biters is going to give you the bandwidth to grow and scale, but taking that time to just really reflect and get organized is going to serve you better in the long run. And also, if you enjoy wine, it's just a really interesting episode about the wine industry and how it's been evolving for thousands of years. So it's really, really fun. That's episode 5, Entrepreneurship in the World's Oldest Industry with Joe Welch. Episode 6, Defining Your Values and the Future of Work, features Ann Wallen, a tech and media executive. Ann and I discussed the future of work, what great leadership looks like, and why it's just as important to be clear on your weaknesses as it is to know your strengths. And we also discussed the early years of her career working at a company that was disrupting 2 industries at the same time, entertainment and tech. This episode is really such a powerful episode on leadership. And specifically, if you are a leader of people, she gets into really how to build and maintain great teams. And gives very specific examples as well of how you can balance informal and formal leadership styles. And one of the biggest takeaways for me was how she defined vulnerability and how you can make vulnerability an asset to your work. So she shares with us that vulnerability doesn't mean you have to be an open book. I'm going to read a direct quote from her interview. Vulnerability is being open with what you know and what you don't know. And be confident that that's a strength to be able to declare, I'm unsure about this, because that provides the opportunity for more collaboration, different perspectives, and overall better output. It is really a thought-provoking episode. I have so many different aha moments. I've listened to it a couple of times and I take something away from it differently each time. And on a personal note, Anne supported me in the launch of this podcast before we launched, end of 2022. And she gave me a lot of great guidance on how to interview people, which is something I had never done before. So it's a skill that I had to learn and I'm still practicing. So I am very grateful to Anne for that. And it's a special episode to me. Our next guest is found in episode 8, Overcoming the Period Post-Crisis with Jeffrey Shaw. Jeff is the ultimate champion for the self-employed. He's a business coach. He's the author of the books Lingo and The Self-Employed Life, and he is the host of the Self-Employed Life podcast. And with Jeff's career and background, he has an interesting perspective on the period post-crisis. So he's always been self-employed. He's always been in this luxury space, but watching his businesses and his clients' businesses and their lives have all changed after certain major crises. So 9/11, the Great Recession of 2008, and then our recent pandemic. He gets into what are the biggest shifts and changes that he has seen coming out of that. Other interesting takeaways from Jeff is we talk about the difference between self-employed, small business, solopreneur, and entrepreneur. And those are all different. And it's interesting, especially now that I've been embarking on an entrepreneurship, solopreneurship, self-employed journey. It has helped me get some clarity on the differences there. And one of the biggest pieces that people struggle with that he shared with us on the show is prospecting. And really, how are you getting people into your business? How are you generating income? And one of the biggest takeaways that I have been working on is how to maximize your lurkers. So different people watching what you're doing and paying attention to what you're building. And slowly, as you get closer, you bring them into your orbit. So they go from lurkers to acquaintances to in the community to then potential clients. So it's really interesting to hear from Jeff, especially because his entire career has been self-employed. That is episode 8, Overcoming the Period Post-Crisis with Jeffrey Shaw. Episode 11 is Ditch Feature Selling and Start Storytelling with Ravi Rajani. Ravi is a storytelling coach and consultant, and it is such a funny episode. You will be laughing out loud. Ravi is so fun. He's so entertaining, but he's really, really knowledgeable. And you can tell he has a passion for helping sellers add storytelling as one of the other tools in their tool belt. And some of the big takeaways that I got from this episode is that storytelling is not just customer success stories or case studies. And I think especially in B2B, we see that more frequently. So really successful storytelling is really important tool that we can use to inspire our prospect to take action. And we can use storytelling throughout the entire sales process. So Ravi has a lot of acronyms and a lot of tactical ways that you can build your own stories. But one of the things that I have used, and I see this in how we show up in LinkedIn posts, how we show up in quickly talking to clients at networking events, is this 90-second story. And it's composed of a handful of key elements. So the first is a hook, something that really breaks the pattern and grabs their attention. The next piece is we have to establish some context of where the story is, who's in it, right? That's kind of the basics. But then we have to introduce some conflict. So where was the villain in the story? After the conflict, we introduce a turning point. So what is that aha moment? What is the transformation that the main character goes through? And that really leads to the impact on the prospect that you're telling that story to and the call to action. So in 90 seconds, we have a hook, we have context, we have conflict, turning point, transformation, prospect impact, call to action. It is very cool. I like that he breaks it down almost like a formula and that we can just plug and play what works for us, our business, and our prospects. That is episode 11, Ditch Feature Selling and Start Storytelling with Ravi Rajani. Our next guest episode was episode 15, 4 Points to Operate in an Attention Economy with Jay Datani. We're in a time where all businesses, brands, and people are all vying for eyeballs and fighting for attention. So how can we stop the scroll and get prospects and consumers to engage with our brand, engage with our product or service, engage with our marketing? Jay's global experience in building brands that became household names makes him an invaluable resource to the show. And the episode is so good because he gets into specific details and examples that are very relatable because you've probably seen them in your Instagram feed. One of the biggest lessons, he goes into 4 different points, but the first one is really powerful. It's what stuck with me the most. Is that when you're crafting your brand or your business messaging and the content and the marketing and the social media, what are you communicating outwardly? Is you really have to define an overarching brand story that you want to tell your consumers. And when you're building that story, it's really important that you and the brand are not the hero. The consumer or the prospect is the hero. And we, as the business or the sellers, we are the guides in aiding them on their journey. It was such a great perspective. It really establishes some guardrails to support us when we're creating our messaging. And it's something I'm happy I did this episode because I want to revisit it because I think maybe I need to shift some of my content. So if you have not listened to that episode, it's episode 15. 4 Points to Operate in an Attention Economy with Jay Datani. Episode 18, Sales is Everywhere. Embracing it leads to a more interesting life and career with Lauren Ashley Smith. Lauren is a seasoned real estate professional with 20 years of experience in commercial real estate, investment banking, mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, strategic advisory. Her career journey is so interesting and so impressive, and she attributes a lot of her success to her ability to sell because at the end of the day, sales is everywhere. And what I loved about my conversation with Lauren is that it really leaves you with a sense of confidence in how we're all going about building our world of sales. And every interaction we have with people gives us data points. And the more data points that we have to reference, the greater conversations, transactions, and opportunities are going to be afforded to us. This is especially important when we're communicating across multiple generations and diverse backgrounds. Lauren has helped me a couple of times in my business. She's been a really nice mentor to me. And we also talk about in our episode, the spirit of generosity and how helping others propels us forward. And it's not necessarily a tit for tat. I may not help Lauren in return, but I may help someone and pay it forward. And if we have this spirit of generosity, it's going to always come back to us in different ways. And I thought that was really special. So that's episode 18, Sales is Everywhere. Embracing it leads to a more interesting life and career with Lauren Ashley Smith. This leads us to episode 22, The Future of Luxury with Amanda Frazier. Amanda is the president of ratings for Forbes Travel Guide, and her 20 years of experience at Forbes Travel Guide, Amanda has had a front row seat to the evolution of luxury hospitality. And she and her team have been the leaders in literally creating the standards and guidelines for what it means to deliver that luxury guest experience. So it was so special to have her on the show this year. My biggest takeaway from Amanda is that we can deliver a luxury experience at any level. She shares a story about living in Georgia and going to a Chick-fil-A with her son when he was younger, and they ordered a kid's meal and it came with an ice cream cone. And the Chick-fil-A employee told the family that they would wait until the son was done with his meal to bring out their ice cream cone to them so it wouldn't melt. And it's such a great example of delivering luxury. It's easy, it was authentic, and it's clearly memorable because she's talked about it as an example 10 years later. We also discussed authenticity as this key to unlocking an element of luxury, and really embracing your authentic self can help remove intimidation when you're servicing or selling to a luxury clientele. One of the biggest pieces of advice that Amanda had for us was to not overthink it. And really, authenticity is luxury. We also got into 4 upcoming travel trends that we're going to see in the future of luxury travel and the luxury service. It's a very forward-thinking leadership episode coming from Amanda and the Forbes Travel Guide team. It's super aspirational. It makes you want to travel the world. So if you need a little break during this winter season, make sure you're listening to episode 22, The Future of Luxury with Amanda Frazier. Episode 27, Work from the Inside Out, features Tammy Guler-Loeb, a career and executive coach, author, and speaker. Tammy inspires people to build careers that are fulfilling and meaningful. For over 2 decades, Tammy has shared her expertise with audiences and clients and focusing specifically on career transitions, networking, leadership strategies, and team development. We discussed what it means to work from the inside out. And when we think about how we're showing up in our lives, we have so much external influence that's always pushing us to make decisions, from our upbringing to societal pressures and expectations to behaving how we think our bosses, spouses, parents, etc. want us to act instead of acting in alignment with what we actually desire. So getting in touch with our intuition is one of the biggest takeaways, and following what lights us up is what's going to be how we get there. Another impactful piece of information that I got out of our conversation was that our network is much larger than we think it is, and that includes our personal network. So if we're exploring new careers or trying to figure out how to do something, like write a Christmas movie, we have so many resources in the form of specifically people to figure it out. And when I started my business, there were people that I used to work with that I wanted to reach out to, but I hadn't spoken to them in 7 years, 10 years, 15 years. And every single person I reached out to, without fail, was happy to hear from me and more than happy to help me. So it took a little push from Tammy to give me that lesson, but it was a great lesson, and I wanted to make sure that I captured it here. That was episode 27, Work from the Inside Out with Tammy Guler-Loeb. Next up is episode 29, Passion Meets Action, Designing a Dream Career with Mike Woodward. Mike is a multimedia ideation consultant and a producer who has over 2 decades in the entertainment industry. Mike works for the ATS team, and he currently serves as the president of originals and productions. The ATS team is the group behind the obstacles you see on American Ninja Warrior and The Amazing Race, and Mike has been spearheading their original projects as a division that he created 6 years ago. And some of the biggest takeaways from Mike is that it's really important to share your ideas with your teams. Holding an idea internally will never come to fruition. Don't be afraid of people stealing it because they can't steal an idea that has never been spoken out loud, and especially if you're not acting on it. So use your voice and speak up. And maybe you don't have an idea that's fully baked, but if you bring it to your boss, your team, or even your clients, once it's out there, it can be built upon and grow. And if we wait for perfection, it's never going to get done. Mike also gave really great examples of going with the flow and following those trade winds. And I think when we hear go with the flow, it's a little tough to understand how to do it. But he shares that if you put a goal out there, you can't necessarily be attached to how you're going to get the goal. You really have to just follow those trade winds. And sometimes that means getting off one ship and getting onto another ship. But one of the ways that you can visualize your goals or really take the time to understand what it is that you want, Mike calls them stress naps, which is so funny. And I've been using that term ever since our interview. So if you're stuck, overwhelmed, if you don't know where to go next, just take some time, take that stress nap, turn off your brain, meditate, and then the calmness and the clarity will follow. Mike's episode was super fun, very interesting. It's episode 29, Passion Meets Action, Designing a Dream Career with Mike Woodward. Next up, we have episode 31, Finding Inspired Purpose with Tony Martignetti. Tony is a leadership coach, author of Climbing the Right Mountain, and host of the Virtual Campfire podcast, where he shares lessons from leaders in their transformation journey. Tony is a special soul. Everyone who meets Tony can feel his positive and kind energy. I personally love Tony's insights on fulfillment and self-leadership. Tony's definition of fulfillment is that it's not a destination, but it's a mindset. It's a place to come from. It's a sense of how am I connected to who I want to be and not what do I want to achieve. I thought it was such an interesting lens to view fulfillment, which is why I'm sharing it here. And another big piece that I really learned from Tony is that leadership comes at every level, and it's not about managing people or having a title. He uses the term self-leadership. Self-leadership is the cornerstone of everything, and it's an understanding of who am I? What do I stand for? What are the thoughts that are creating my world? And if we don't have this defined, it's almost like we're driving blind. So getting really clear on what self-leadership is my biggest takeaway. And I view Tony as such a unique thought leader, and I was very grateful to have him on the show. So that's episode 31, Finding Inspired Purpose with Tony Martignetti. Episode 32, Management versus Leadership. Learn the key differences and start to lead your people better with Jordan Modiano. Jordan is a leadership consultant and public speaker. He's also the owner of Express Employment Professionals in the capital region of New York. He has a heavy sales and leadership background, and our episode talks about the difference between managing and leading. Key takeaways from Jordan is really what makes an effective leader. So some of the different things that make effective leaders are being an active listener, and listening to understand is very important. People want to communicate with you, and as a leader, it is your job to take in that communication. Of course, having a thick skin, being able to have tough conversations, being able to take honest feedback, all of those things are also crucial. And then another important piece to look at is how are you portraying the role that you would like your people to do? So if you have an expectation that your team is going to show up early every day, are you showing up early every day? He has a great quote. Manager is do what I say, not what I do. Leadership is follow my example. Jordan also shares a couple of personal stories, and you can definitely tell that that is what makes him such a great speaker. When you hear his stories and how you can apply those learnings in your own life, you come away very inspired, very engaged as you listen to him. It's such a great episode. That's episode 32, Management versus Leadership with Jordan Modiano. Episode 34, Smashing the Plateau with David Schreiner-Kahn. David is the podcast host and community builder behind Smashing the Plateau, an online platform offering resources, accountability, and camaraderie to high-performing professionals who are making the leap from a corporate career track to entrepreneurial business ownership. One huge lesson from David on the show, I revisit it often, is that he gives clarity on the difference between goals versus objectives. Goals are something that's specific enough so you know that you're working towards them, yet they're not necessarily time bound or bound by metrics. So, for example, a goal could be Sara Murray wants to build a business. Objectives are measurable and concrete. So you know that you've reached an objective and you're finished with it. So my goal could be get the podcast to the top 1% of all global podcasts. You can take that goal and define specific objectives to get you there, but there's a difference. And hopefully those quick examples made that clear. I also asked David, what are some of the biggest struggles he sees within his community? And his advice was to focus on what you can control. Too often we get overwhelmed and stressed out by things we can't control. I asked him for an example and he gave some great ones. So I'm just going to quote David directly here. I can get stressed out about the size of my podcast audience, or I can get stressed about how many impressions I get on a LinkedIn post. I have no control over that. I can control what I write. If I think what I write is helpful to my audience, okay. If I get actual concrete feedback from somebody that I can work on, that's great. But if it's something that's a vanity metric that I have no control over, what's the point of getting stressed over it? It doesn't drive my business metrics or anything else. That was very cool for me to hear. I felt like it helped me. So hopefully that helped you. And David is such a practical and kind person. He truly wants to support others and see them succeed in their entrepreneurial journeys. He's helped me a handful of times, which I am so grateful for. And his podcast is full of corporate refugees sharing their lessons and their knowledge. So make sure you check that out. And that is episode 34, Smashing the Plateau with David Schreiner-Kahn. We got 2 more left. Episode 36, Sales Implementation and Sales Team Accountability with Doug Miller, Fractional Sales VP. Doug and I met at a virtual networking event and we nerd out about sales every time we talk. So I was excited to have him on the show. I asked him for the best piece of sales advice he's received. And this is a great takeaway. I'm going to just quote him directly here. Don't spend all your time with people like you. It's a classic mistake that many salespeople make. You find somebody who's enthusiastic about what you're selling and the value that you're going to provide, and it's like a drug. You want to spend all your time with them because they're providing you with this amazing positive feedback for what you're doing, and it feels good. But Doug's point is that the reality is in most companies, there are many different stakeholders involved in the decision-making process. And if we're only spending time with people like us, we miss opportunities to uncover potential issues or objections that will prevent your deal from closing. So we need to make sure we're talking to everyone who has decision-making capabilities, especially if they are not like us, and finding that common ground between all prospects. Doug and I also get into the value of CRM systems, how to embrace them, how to lead teams and hold them accountable to meet specific goals. It's a very sales-heavy episode. So if you're in a sales role, I encourage you to listen to episode 36, Sales Implementation and Sales Accountability with Doug Miller. And then our final guest episode this year was episode 47, How to Get Unstuck with Holly Markham. Holly is the founder and co-owner of European Home, a design-oriented manufacturer of imported modern fireplaces based in Massachusetts. Holly and I discussed how her sales and marketing background helped her build the skill set she needed to grow her business. But a bulk of the conversation was around what to do when you're overwhelmed, stuck, or if you have this large, complex nut you need to crack. And 2 of the big pieces I learned from Holly was that if you feel stuck, any type of movement will help spark momentum. Basically, we're greasing the wheels. So she shared that if she's dragging her feet on a task, she'll commit to working on it for 10 minutes. And oftentimes that 10 minutes will turn into 20 or 30 minutes. So just push through and do a little bit. And she gives this great example of human decision-making capabilities as almost functioning like a flow chart. If I do this, this will happen. If I do that, that will happen. Which one am I over here? So your brain goes through all of these processes. But if we focus too much on the result and the how we're going to get there, we paralyze ourselves. So if we're focused on the result, that's where we're getting stuck. But if you just move it along a little bit, all of a sudden you're halfway there. And getting to that halfway point is what makes the end clearer and more achievable. That was episode 47, How to Get Unstuck with Holly Markham. Honestly, I feel so grateful and touched that these individuals gave us their time and their expertise. Obviously, there are so many more impactful lessons beyond what I just shared here, but I wanted to give a little sneak peek if anyone missed any of these, or if you wanted to have almost like a table of contents and a rundown. If you haven't listened to those full episodes and something resonated, make sure you go back and take a listen. I will make sure they're all linked in the show notes. And all of these folks are fairly accessible if you want to reach out to them on LinkedIn and let them know how their episode and insights impacted you. I'm sure they would appreciate it. I would as well. If you want to send me a note, I want to thank you so much for listening to our 2023 Guest Roundup. I am excited for the upcoming guests in 2024. There's a nice list going, a nice crew assembling here for the upcoming year. So I am very anxious and excited to see where we can all grow and learn from one another, anxious in the best possible way. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. Again, as always, please subscribe, rate, leave a review. It means so much to us. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to the Prospecting on Purpose podcast. If you loved what you heard today, subscribe to the podcast and please rate and leave a review. For more info on me, or if you'd like to work together, feel free to go to my website, saramurray.com. On social media, I'm usually hanging out at Sara Murray Sales. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.